My name is Jordan Holloway, and I was 32 years old the night my father slid a white envelope across the dinner table to my brother. Inside that envelope was $60,000 for Kyle's down payment. And when I asked about my own plans, my mother folded her napkin and said, "You can rent somewhere, honey. You've always been fine." She said it the way you would tell a waitress the food was fine. My brother got a house that night. I got a compliment sharp enough to shave with. What I did over the next 18 months, my family never saw coming. And 2 years later, at that same table, on that same tablecloth, they asked me for something that still takes my breath away when I think about it. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories. This channel is where quiet people finally tell the stories their families never wanted to hear. Stories about patience, boundaries, and the moment everything changes. If you have ever been the one who was always fine, this story is for you. Drop a comment below and be sure to subscribe. Now, let me take you back to that dining room in Kettering, Ohio, where the whole thing started with pot roast, a white envelope, and a sentence my mother thought was a kindness. You need a little history to understand that envelope. In my family, money moved like water. It flowed downhill, and downhill was always Kyle. He was 4 years older than me, and his whole life came with a rescue package attached. When he totaled his Camaro at 19, my parents replaced it. When he quit college in his junior year, they paid off the loans so it wouldn't follow him around. When his credit card hit 5 figures at 28, my mother cashed a certificate of deposit she'd held since her wedding. Nobody ever sat me down and explained the rule, but I learned it the way you learn a stove is hot. Money in our house went to whoever was drowning. I never drowned. I worked summers at a snow cone stand, put myself through nursing school, and took a job in the pediatric intensive care unit at a hospital in Dayton. Night shift because it paid a differential. 9 years of it. I held other people's babies through the worst nights of their lives, then drove home at 7 in the morning and clipped coupons. My rent was cheap. My car was a 12-year-old Honda, with a rosary hanging off the mirror that I kept because it came with the car. And here is the part nobody at that dinner table knew. By the night of the envelope, I had $48,000 sitting in a savings account. I had built $500 at a time since I was 23. I had never mentioned it. In my family, having money you didn't need was like having a porch light on in the daytime. Nobody saw the point of it. They were about to teach me exactly what the point of it was. It was a Sunday in March, pot roast night, the good tablecloth with the ivy border. Kyle had been talking for 20 minutes about a house on Sycamore Trail. 4 bedrooms, $285,000, granite countertops. He said granite countertops 3 separate times like it was a spell. He was 36 and between jobs again consulting, which as far as I could tell meant sleeping until 10. Then my dad reached inside his jacket and slid the envelope across the tablecloth. $60,000, he said. Your mother and I have been talking. It's from the retirement account. You can't get a start these days without help. My mother had her hands folded like she was in church. Kyle's eyes went wet and he hugged them both, and I sat there with my fork in the air doing arithmetic I couldn't stop. $60,000 was N years of my night shifts. I waited for the part where they turned to me. I actually waited. Then I heard myself say quietly, "That's great for Kyle. I've been thinking about houses too, actually. Any help for my down payment someday?" The room got a texture to it. My dad started his plate and my mother reached over, patted my hand twice, and said the sentence that built everything that came after. "Oh, honey, you can rent somewhere. You've always been fine." Kyle laughed, not meanly, just easily. The way you laugh when the world agrees with you. Somebody changed the subject to countertops. I ate the rest of my pot roast and said almost nothing. And under the good tablecloth with the ivy border, something in me quietly closed a door and locked it. I drove the 20 minutes back to my apartment above the Suds Bucket laundromat, where the dryers thumped under my floor until 11 every night, and I sat down at my kitchen table with a legal pad. Nobody got a venting phone call that night. A decade of hospitals teaches you a certain sequence. Chart it, fix it, move on. At the top of the pad, I wrote a number, 48,212. Under it, I wrote what I knew, which wasn't much. I knew houses cost money. I knew Dayton was one of the cheapest markets in the country. I knew I was done asking anyone at that table for anything ever. And the strange thing is that the decision didn't feel hot. It felt like turning off a faucet that had been dripping my whole life. In the morning, I called the credit union I'd banked at since nursing school and asked what a person with my income could borrow. The loan officer was a kind woman named Denise, who chewed gum straight through the call. She ran my numbers and came back with a figure that was about 30,000 less than I had hoped on account of a nurse's salary being a nurse's salary. I remember standing at my window, watching a man carry a trash bag of laundry across the parking lot, phone warm against my ear. "Is that enough to buy anything worth owning?" I asked. Denise popped her gum. "Depends," she said, "on whether you're picky." I decided right then that the bank's number would be enough, because I would make it enough. I had no idea yet how a person did that, but I knew who would. The answer, it turned out, met on the second Tuesday of every month in a church basement off Wayne Avenue. The Greater Dayton Real Estate Investors Association. Folding chairs, burnt coffee, a laminated sign in sheet. I found them in through the library, where I had checked out every book on rental property they had, all 6, and read them on my breaks between rounds. That first Tuesday, I sat in the back row with my legal pad and understood maybe half of what anyone said. There were flippers in expensive boots, a retired school teacher with 14 units, a young woman from the local business who came sometimes to scout stories. And in the corner, an old man in a Carhartt jacket who said almost nothing and got treated like a bishop when he did. Earl Novak, 71 years old, 40 years a landlord, down to his last few buildings and famously unimpressed by everyone. During the break, I introduced myself and told him I wanted to buy a duplex, live in half, rent out the other half. He looked at me the way you look at a parking meter. "Everybody wants to be a landlord," he said, "until a toilet calls them at 2 o'clock in the morning." Then he refilled his coffee and walked off. That was the whole conversation. I drove home oddly happy. He hadn't told me it was a bad idea. He had told me what the price was, which is a different thing entirely, and prices were something I understood. I went back the next month and every month after. It took Earl 3 meetings to remember my name. By May, I'd learned the term that would quietly root my whole life, house hacking, and I had found a listing that smelled, in every sense, like a beginning. Before the beginning, though, I had to survive Kyle's housewarming. 60 people in a 4-bedroom on Sycamore Trail. Balloons on the mailbox. My mother giving tours like a doesn't. "Feel this countertop," she kept saying. "Just feel it." The house was objectively lovely. That's the complicated part nobody warns you about. I didn't hate the house. I hated the arithmetic under it. My Aunt Sharon found me by the veggie tray and asked when I was going to settle down and stop renting, and she asked it gently with real affection, which somehow made it worse. I said something about the market. She patted my arm. Then my mother clinked a glass and gave a toast, and I want to quote it exactly because I have never forgotten it. "To family, taking care of family. That's what we do." Everyone raised their drinks, including me. I spent the next hour fing dirty plates to the kitchen because at every family event I have ever attended, I somehow end up staffing it. And through the window over Kyle's brand new farmhouse sink, I watched my dad show 3 neighbors the garage. I felt like a woman watching a play about a family that looked exactly like hers. That night, back over the laundromat, I opened my laptop and there it was on the listing site. 11 days on market. A 1924 brick duplex on Wren Street. 1 unit occupied, 1 vacant. Needs TLC, which is realtor for bring a flashlight. $148,500. I looked at the photos until 2 in the morning. The sagging porch, the twin front doors, the good bones under the bad paint. Family takes care of family, my mother had said. I decided to become my own. The numbers on Wren Street worked like this, and I ran them so many times the legal pad went soft. Purchase price $14.85. An FHA loan, the kind first-time buyers use, wanted just 3.5% down if I lived in the property, which came to about $5,200. The occupied unit be rented for $850 a month to a long-time tenant named Miss Patrice. My whole payment, taxes and insurance included, would land around $11.40. Rent covers most of the mortgage. I cover the difference and the repairs. The house pays me to live in it, more or less. Denise said the credit union walked me through the paperwork and only popped her gum twice. And then I did something that, looking back, was me giving my family one last honest chance. I called my dad, not my mother. My dad, the retired electrician, the man who could read a breaker panel like sheet music. I told him I was looking at a 2-family on Wren Street and asked if he'd walk it with me on Saturday. Kick the furnace. Tell me what the wiring was worth. There was a pause. I could have parked a truck in. Then he said, well, sure, kiddo. Saturday at 10 o'clock. And here's the thing. He sounded glad. He sounded like a man who had been waiting to be asked something by his daughter and didn't know it. I hung up and stood in my kitchen, grinning like an idiot at a dish towel. For about 4 days, I let myself imagine it. My dad and me in a basement, him pointing his flashlight at the good bones, nodding slow. Saturday came with rain. At 10:15, my phone buzzed. The text said, Kyle's water heater let go. Basement's flooding. Gotta run over with the shop vac. Rain check, kiddo. A house he'd owned for barely a month, and its water heater had already quit. I'd learned later Kyle had nicked the pressure valve hanging a bike rack. But that morning, all I knew was the arithmetic again. His emergency, my rain check, always in that order. I sat in my Honda outside the duplex for 1 full minute, watching rain crawl down the windshield. Then I went in alone, because the inspector I'd hired at $400 was already on the porch, and my money spends whether I'm sad or not. His name was Dale Pute. And he crawled that house like a tick. What he found in Unit B's ceiling was knob and tube wiring. The old stuff pre-war insurance companies hate it. A year earlier that sentence would have meant nothing to me. But I'd spent every break since March reading, and I knew 3 things standing in that wet basement. 1, it wasn't dangerous if left alone. 2, it would cost about $6,500 to remediate. 3, it was leverage. I wrote the seller a calm little letter through my agent, attached the inspection page, and asked for $6,500 off at closing. They counted at 5 even. I said $6,500 or I walk. And I priced the walk into my voice. They took it. My dad never asked about the house again, not out of malice. It just fell out of his head, the way my things always did. Congratulations, hun, she said, gumming. You're buying a duplex alone, I thought. Every signature of it. Closing took 40 minutes in a title office next to a vape shop, 60-some pages, and I read everyone because nobody was coming to catch my mistakes. The title officer kept glancing at the door, and finally asked if we were waiting on anyone. A husband, a parent, a realtor boyfriend. It's just me, I said. And she said, good for you. In the voice people use for dogs who can shake. I signed until my hand cramped. Wire transfer 5,200 down. Closing costs mostly eaten by my knob and tube credit. And then a small brass key on a paper tag was sitting in my palm. And I was a homeowner, and no one on this earth knew except a gum-chewing loan officer, and the state of Ohio. I drove straight to Wren Street. Unit was empty and smelled like cat, and 1987. I sat down on the bare floor of what would be my living room. Ate a gas station turkey sandwich, and listened to Miss Patrice's television murmuring through the wall like a heartbeat. I thought about calling my mother. I truly did consider it, sitting there cross-legged on someone's old carpet with my keys. And then I played the call forward the way you learned to in my family. The pause, the well that seems risky, honey, the pivot within 90 seconds to how Kyle was doing with his new gutters. My news would be borrowed against, or worried over, or worst of all waved off. So I finished my sandwich, and told the empty room instead. It's ours. Earl Novak turned out to be a prophet. 19 days after closing at 2:14 in the morning, my phone rang and it was Miss Patrice, apologetic and dignified, reporting that the toilet in Unit B was having opinions. I had just come off shift. I stood in her bathroom in my scrubs at 3 a.m., with a flange wrench I'd bought that week, a phone propped on the sink playing a repair video at half speed, and I fixed it. Took me 2 hours and 1 skinned knuckle. Miss Patrice made me instant coffee, and told me the last landlord would have taken a month. That was my education. That first summer, I patched plaster after night shifts. I learned that paint is cheap and is a love language. I mowed my own lawn with a push mower from an estate sale, waving at neighbors who slowly stopped watching me like a rerun and started bringing zucchini. And the numbers did exactly what the legal pad promised. Mortgage $1,140. Miss Patrice's rent $850. My personal cost of housing that first full month came to $290, less than half what the laundromat apartment had run me. And I own the roof over both our heads. Every dollar the house didn't eat went back into the savings account along with every overtime shift the hospital would give me. And they'd give a night nurse plenty. I kept going to Sunday dinner in Kettering, 20 minutes east, and I kept my mouth shut. My mother would ask if I was still in that little apartment, and I would say I'd moved to a place on Wren Street, and she would say that's nice honey, and refill Kyle's tea which suited me fine. Right up until the Sunday it didn't. It was late September and I decided to test the water. Not confess, just test. Scientists call it a trial balloon. Night nurses call it checking whether the family wants the truth or the comfortable chart. My mother had spent the appetizer asking me to help Kyle set up a little budget since you're so good with money, and he's got property taxes now. Read that twice if you want to understand my family. I was good with money the way a mule is good with weight. A talent for carrying, never for owning. So between the salad and the roast, I said as evenly as I could. Actually, I've been looking at property myself. Rentals. I've been studying it for a while. And my mother laughed. Not cruey. That's what I need you to understand. None of it was ever cruel. Cruelty you can at least stand up and fight. She laughed the way you laugh at a child who says she's going to be an astronaut. A soft little puff of air and said on a nurse's salary. Honey, the taxes alone. Dennis, tell her about Ted's rental. The one with the raccoons. My dad dutifully told the raccoon story. Kyle talked about crown molding. The balloon drifted off unnoticed over a table of people I loved. And I sat there and made a decision I'd keep for the next year and a half. They had answered my question, and I would not ask it again. Let me pause here. Friend to friend. If you've ever tested the water with your own family, and watched them laugh before you even finish the sentence, you know exactly why I went quiet. Stay with me because this gets so much duplex. You'll want to see their faces later. In October, I did something at the REIA meeting I'd been working up to months. I showed Earl Novak my numbers. Actual printed spreadsheets, purchase price, rent roll, repair log, 4 months of it, held out to him at the coffee table like homework. He grunted, sat down, and read every line while the flippers in expensive boots orbited elsewhere. Twice he took out a pencil. He crossed out my repair reserve and wrote a bigger one. Furnace is from '09, he said. You're budgeting like it's immortal. It's not. Then he tapped the bottom line and looked at me. Actually looked for the first time since April. You live in the ugly unit, he said. I do, I said. You fix your own toilets. I had a video. Something happened in his face that on a different man might have been a smile. From then on, I had a standing seat next to the Carhartt jacket, and a running seminar nobody else seemed to want. Capital expenditure, vacancy math, why you never fall in love with a property that can't pay its own way. Only once did he tell me anything personal. I'd asked carefully if his kids were in the business, and Earl looked at his coffee for a while. I gave my son everything, he said. First truck, first house, bailed out his restaurant twice. He's 51 now. Doesn't return my calls, and I still can't tell you what he's good at. He turned his cup a quarter turn. Help that never asks you to grow isn't help. I learned that $200,000 too late. Then he stood, said he was packing something up this winter, whatever that meant, and left me sitting there with a sentence I'd end up carrying like a key. Property number 2 found me in October, an estate sale on Marigold Street. A little 2-bedroom the heirs in Florida wanted gone before the holidays. 85,000 ASIS, tenants of the deceased long moved out. As is meant carpet, with a biography, and a kitchen last updated when Nixon was president. But Dale Pute crawled it and found the skeleton sound. This time the loan was conventional investment property 20% down, $17,000, and the rehab budget was 15 more, most of which I saved by doing demolition myself. If you have never spent your day off tearing out 1974 shag carpet, with a utility knife and a respirator, I recommend it over therapy. It's cheaper and you get a floor at the end. It was during that stretch buying my third utility knife, at the Home Depot, on Miami Centerville Road, that I ran into my brother Kyle in the seasonal aisle loading a $600 pizza oven onto a cart. He was delighted to see me. Kyle was always genuinely delighted to see people. It's his best feature. And he talked for 10 minutes straight. The oven was for entertaining. And entertaining mattered because he was getting into real estate. He said him and his buddy Dayak were going to flip a house. He was thinking about a home equity line to fund his share. There were courses you could take. Apparently, he said the word passive income twice. He paid for the pizza oven with a card he pulled from the back of his wallet, and I caught the name on it, Carol Holloway. He never once asked what I was doing there, standing in my demolition clothes, drywall dust in my eyebrows, holding a utility knife. I watched him wheel the oven out to his truck, and thought, he's going to get hurt. I found the key rack in the Marigold cellar the second week of November, in a box of jelly jars under the stairs. Oak about the length of my forearm, with 4 brass hooks and somebody's wood-burned roses from 50 years ago. Most of the estate's links went to the curb, but I stood there in the cellar light holding this thing longer than I can explain. That night, I sanded it on my kitchen table at Wren Street, rubbed it with butcher block oil, and screwed it to the wall beside the back door dead level. Because if you're going to make yourself a promise, you should at least use a level. On the first brass hook, I hung the Wren Street key. On the second, the Marigold key, shiny from the hardware store that cut it. And then there were the other 2 hooks. And I want to be honest with you about what happened, because this is the part I've never told anyone. I stood in my kitchen looking at those two empty hooks and I heard my mother's voice, clear as the dryers used to be under my old floor. "You've always been fine." That sentence had been handed to me my whole life like a napkin. Something to keep my lap clean while everyone else got served. Fine. Standing there smelling of butcher block oil, I decided to take the word all the way literally. If fine was my inheritance, I would compound it. Fine would mean 4 hooks, 4 keys, and not $1 of anyone's envelope. And I gave myself a deadline out loud in the empty kitchen, which is the only witness I trusted. 1 year for the other 2. The rack hung there, catching the street light like it was in on it. 2 hooks filled, 2 to go. Here is what the next stretch actually cost, because the internet loves a montage and I don't. I worked 3 12-hour nights a week in the PICU, picked up a 4th when they begged, and gave Marigold nearly every daylight hour a body can give. After that, I learned to sleep in 2 shifts like a medieval peasant. Twice I woke up at dusk in my Honda outside the hardware store with sawdust in my hair and no memory of deciding to close my eyes. I missed my college roommate's wedding in Columbus because the furnace guy could only come Saturday. I mailed a gravy boat and a lie about a work conflict and she knew it was a lie. And that friendship has a hairline crack in it to this day that I put there. My world got small and specific. Rounds, rosaries of receipts, the smell of joint compound. The one person who saw any of it was Tanya, who'd worked nights with me for 6 years and could read me like a monitor. She helped me haul a vanity up the Marigold steps one frozen Sunday. And afterward, sitting on paint buckets eating drive-through, she watched me log the receipt in my binder and asked the question I'd been out running since March. "Geordie, who exactly are you proving this to?" I said something about compound interest. She let it sit there between us like a dropped instrument. By Christmas week, Marigold had new floors, a white kitchen, and a tenant. A hospital records clerk and her daughter. $1,100 a month. Lee signed at my kitchen table under the key rack. I remember thinking the hard part was over. The hard part had not started introducing itself yet. Thanksgiving that year was at Kyle's, catered by my mother out of coolers, eaten off the granite. Kyle stood to make an announcement over the pie. He and Dayak were officially in business. They'd found a flip house in Trotwood and Kyle was funding his half with a $38,000 home equity line against Sycamore Trail. He said the bank had approved it in 9 days. Said sweat equity said the course teaches you everything. My parents glowed like a furnace. My mother squeezed his arm and told the table, he's always had the vision. And my dad raised his coffee to real estate men. I sat there holding at that exact moment 2 rental properties, a repair log, and a spreadsheet Earl Novak had personally corrected, and I said, "Pass the beans." I'm not going to pretend that silence was noble. It had rust in it. But I'd tested the water in September and gotten the raccoon story. And you don't pour good news down a drain twice. Here's the beat from that night. I actually can shake, though. Leaving in the cold driveway, my dad caught my elbow and pressed something into my hand. Folded small the way he's folded things my whole life. $50. Gas money, he said, not meeting my eyes. Don't tell your mother. I drove back to Wren Street, with that 50 on the passenger seat like it was riding shotgun. And somewhere on Route 48, I had to pull into a speedway lot for a minute. A $60,000 envelope for Kyle passed across a tablecloth in front of witnesses. $50 for me folded into a palm in the dark with instructions to keep it secret. The exchange rate on being fine. I kept the bill. I still have it. In April, on Earl's calendar, like everything now was, I refinanced Marigold. Here's the play in kitchen table English. I'd bought a wreck for $85 and spent $15 making it whole, so about $100,000 all in. Fixed up and rented. The bank's appraiser now valued it at $130,000. The bank would lend me 75% of that new value, $975, which paid off the old $68,000 loan, and handed me back roughly $25,000 in cash tax-free, because borrowed money is an income. My own down payment, most of my rehab money back in my hands, while the records clerk's rent covered the new payment with room to spare. Investors call it recycling capital. I called it the second wind. Earl checked my math and found one error in the bank's favor, which annoyed him more than if it had been in mine. In May, I put that recycled money down on property number 3. A brick bungalow on Cedar Avenue, 92,000, one street over from a hospital shuttle stop, which meant it would never want for tenants, 20% down, 184. A traveling respiratory therapist signed at $9.95 a month before the paint cured. When Denise at the credit union processed the